Welcome to the Herb Farm here in Falls City, Washington. I'm Laura Bird. The Introduction to Herbs class is one of the most popular classes here at the farm. Every year, hundreds of visitors get an overview of the satisfying experience of both growing and using fresh herbs. In this video version of the class, we'll talk to some of the farm specialists who'll give you some of the basics for getting started in both the kitchen and the garden. In addition, we'll ask them for some of their special tips for working with fresh herbs and maybe even about some herbal lore. So let's get started. This is Carrie Van Dyke, one of our first herb lovers here this morning. And Carrie, when people first come to the herb farm, what do they want to know?
They want to know what herbs they should start growing, and they want to know how to use them, pretty much.
Can you explain to us some of the varieties of uses in different categories of herbs?
Well, you can use herbs fresh, right from the plant, as in with this chive or sage plant. You can use the fresh herbs and make vinegars out of them. You can dry the herbs and use the herbs for medicinal purposes or for crafts, or actually even in cooking once they're dried. We also can use fresh herbs or dried herbs for making soaps and cosmetics and various other products like that. We have edible flowers. You can use herbs for eating. Of course, not all herbs are edible, and you want to be careful what you eat. But to start off with, there are a few real basics that we recommend that people get in their gardens, get used to growing them, harvesting them, using them.
Oh, it's very good. So you're suggesting people start with the basics?
Really, yes.
And that's what we're going to do, is start with the basics.
This is my pet plant, lamb's ear. It's a very soft leaf plant. It can be used simply as an ornamental, or it can be used as it was during the pioneer days as bandages, actually. You could wrap a wound with it. But if nothing else, it can reflect moonlight. It makes wonderful gray plant foliage in your garden. And it's very petable. It's very soft.
This is Ellen Pardee. And Ellen, you've been teaching the Introduction to Herbs class at the Herb Farm for what, 2.5 years now?
About 2.5 years.
And when people come to the class initially, what's the first thing they ask you?
They want to know what an herb is.
So most people are unfamiliar with herbs when they come to you originally.
They have a lot of curiosity and they want to learn.
And what do you tell them?
I tell them that an herb is a soft stem plant with savory, aromatic, and medicinal uses. And in addition, since some of the plants do have woody stems, we say an herb is any plant that serves and delights us.
This is a calendula. Its name comes from the fact that it's a flower that will bloom almost any day of the calendar year. It's a very hardy annual plant that's easy to grow. The petals can be used in salads. It's a delightful herb to put into biscuits or muffins, and you get this beautiful confetti effect. It's an herb that can also be used for nourishing the skin. It's a very good herb to put into herb baths, and one that I think you'll have a good time with and find that it's very easy to grow.
You might expect to start experimenting in the garden with growing and harvesting herbs. However, some people need motivation, so we're going to start in the kitchen, where Jerry and Colleen are going to show you 3 basic techniques common to a whole host of recipes. So let's go inside. Before we get started, a lot of people, including myself, feel a little nervous about how much and how to use fresh herbs versus dried herbs. So Jerry has developed a low-risk experiment that you can try at home that will help you develop some ideas about how to use fresh herbs. So let's get started with the question that everyone asks. What's the difference between fresh herbs and dried herbs?
Well, when you're used to using fresh herbs, you know that they have a completely different taste than a dried herb. This is fresh tarragon. The fresh herbs have what's called an essential oil, and it's a volatile oil, which means that it will evaporate into the air, even at room temperature, which is how they're dried. And when they're missing that essential oil, they just have a completely different taste. This is the tarragon, and it has a licoricey taste when it's fresh. It's quite strong. And it's completely different than what you would get in a jar.
So that versus the dried herb.
Right. Well, well, this is dried tarragon. It's missing all of its licorice flavor. See, it just smells sort of like
Now, if you
like
were to use
hay.
this in a soup or something, you could tell that.
Well, you know, you can still taste the tarragon, but you don't
Oh, you're right. There's a big
there's
difference.
just a huge flatness to it.
What about converting dried to fresh? How do we do that?
Well, I mean, there's really no dogma about it, although there is sort of a rule of thumb, and that is like if I was to use that amount of fresh, I would use a third less dried, or 1/3 of that amount dried.
Really?
So it's 3 to 1, 3 to 1.
About
but,
3
you know,
times as much.
Right. But I mean, if you were to actually dry this, you might end up with that much, and that's sort of where that came from. Although again, the taste is going to be very different.
And that's confusing to me, that something that tastes stronger to me, we'd use 3 times as much of.
But there's a lot of water in here, and it's also much fluffier. And so that's one of the reasons it's not as concentrated.
Now, are there some herbs that you would suggest people use dry as opposed to fresh, and vice versa?
Yeah.
There's some that dry better?
Well, there certainly are, and there's generally 2 categories of herbs, although of course there's a lot of exceptions. And this is, there's the more tender herbs like basil or chervil or cilantro, the things with the, or tarragon, the things with very soft leaves, and they, as a rule, don't dry very well at all because all their flavor just disappears.
Okay.
But the ones that have things like sage and rosemary that have these thicker leaves, and these are the ones that tend to be a little more winter hardy. These kind of herbs do dry quite well, and although the flavor is different, there's certainly a use for them in the kitchen.
Does it make any difference at all if they're a perennial or an annual or a biennial? Does that affect the fact that they can or can't be dried effectively? Does that make any difference?
No, but as a general rule, these kind of herbs are perennials and these kind are annuals. But there's all kinds of exceptions.
All kinds of exceptions.
Right.
Now,
but the thing is to just to taste it and not go by, you know, there's no rule of thumb, but you can always smell and taste, and that's the best.
and essentially you can
rule.
use all of them dried and all of them fresh.
Sure,
Just that some...
although some of the dried herbs simply don't have much flavor.
Okay, now, to be very honest, I'd be a little nervous about starting out with fresh herbs for the first time and doing a whole dinner or doing a recipe and having anyone over to my house. So is there a way that we can, in the beginning, kind of, you know, initiate ourselves into how to use fresh
I have
herbs
that little
simple way?
I have this little experiment, and maybe if you can get those bowls
Sure.
over there, I'll get some of a very simple potato and leek soup that I've got.
Ooh.
And I'm going
Right
to
here?
pour out, I'm going to pour out 5 bowls of this. And this is just a simple sort of it's just made with some leeks that are cooked in a little bit of butter, and then I added some chicken stock and some potatoes.
It smells wonderful.
Right, and some milk, and I just boiled it all and then put it in a blender. And so it's a very simple soup, but it's also a nice base for the herbs.
Do you make it sound so simple? In
Well,
my house, it wouldn't be
is
simple.
And this, you know, we're adding the herbs at the very end, and that's something you can do with fresh herbs. And actually, that's how you get an enormous amount of flavor, is to add herbs at the very
Really?
end.
So
of
we'd
cooking.
add the fresh herbs to the soup after it's all done?
You can, sure.
Wow.
And some of the herbs lend themselves better than others. But we have 3 herbs here. We have basil, thyme, and sage. And let's do the little experiment with the thyme this time, between fresh and dried.
Okay.
And I'll put out, let's see on the board, I'll put out that size of, and that's quite a bit for this little amount of soup, but we're going to, you know, just trying to see the difference.
All right.
And that amount of dried.
So we're going to put fresh in
So
one,
fresh in this one.
and we're putting dried in the other.
Right.
And they're both thyme.
They're both thyme. Okay, so why don't you try the soup with the fresh in it and see how
All
it
right.
tastes.